All right, welcome back to another tutorial in Maya. I apologize for being kind of tardy on my postings, but yeah, a lot of work going on. So, anyway, it's a good thing. So, anyway, just want to apologize for not posting something to learn from in the past for the past 3 weeks. So, anyway, let's take a look at particles today, and more so controlling a particle swarm. Uh, Technically, this could be, a swarm of bees, ants, flies, I don't know, whatever, creatures, whatever. And this could be, a creature or a character that's getting swarmed. And right now, it's a fairly simple setup, but there's some things you got to know about controlling these swarms. And it all has to do with when you set this up, kind of the starting point of, creating a swarm and having it do what you want it to do. And in this case, I have a sphere and a locator, and then I have a ground plane, or I have a plane. And then technically, this ground plane is acting as a collision object as well. So I have my particles set up to collide with this object right here and to collide with this object right here. And then I just animated this locator and this object sort of just randomly in the scene. And this is sort of where I'm at. So technically, you're going to take this to another level after you get this set up. You're going to obviously take your particles and you're going to replace them with, an instanced particle. Maybe it's a fly or a bee or something like that. So anyway, I just sort of set this up to show you kind of this ground plane here. When the object dips below the ground plane, these particles, inherently in end particles, they're going to collide with this ground plane if you turn it on. And so let's take a look at that real quick, just before we get too far into this. I'm going to select the particles right here. Let's just select those particles. And I'm going to look at this particle shape up here. And, basically we have a ton of settings that we can mess with. And, it's endless, the combinations you can come up with for, kind of controlling your particles. But we're in this case, I'm looking at the actual nucleus itself. And if you come into your tabs and look in the nucleus, and you can do this, we're going to set this up, fully from the start. So anyway, I just want to make you aware of that, is that this ground plane setting, I have use plane checked. And that's this ground plane is basically where the grid is. And I'll go ahead and hit play. And when this comes below that ground plane, you can kind of see, I'll stop it right there where the particles are sort of blocked by this ground plane. So technically this isn't a collision object that I've assigned anything to. I could make this plane the collision object and not have this plane checked. But this gives you a little bit more options for, when you actually have this ground plane checked. You can kind of set it, a couple of various settings here. We have a bounce setting, a friction setting, and a stickiness setting. So I'm going to go ahead and let this play. And we're using the plane right now. If I were to uncheck this, I'll go ahead and uncheck that use plane. And we'll see what happens when it comes down and goes below the plane. Let's see here. So when it goes below the plane now, the particles themselves dip below the plane. You can kind of see them in there going way below the plane. And, so sometimes you might want to have that. I don't know. Let's roll out here a little bit. And there they come up. So now, if I check this use plane, I'll go ahead and go back to the beginning. We'll start it up again. And there it is. And I'm going to stop this. You can see where they hit the ground plane and they kind of stop. And there they are on top. So anyway, let's play around with maybe like our friction or our stickiness. If I mess with this stickiness as this is playing, come up here and raise that up, you can see where the particles start sticking a little more to the surface. So that's kind of cool. You might need to play around with this a little bit. Just an option. So anyway, that's what that does. We could even add, a little bit more friction, or we could take friction off. If we take the friction off, they kind of flow over the surface a little smoother. yeah, so there's a ton of stuff to play around with here. So let's get started and just set this thing up from scratch and play around with some of the basics that you really have to know in order to control this. So anyway, let's do this. I'm going to save this scene. We'll go ahead and save that, and we'll go ahead and create a new scene. And basically, let's start with a locator. And I'm going to click on locator, and there it is. This is simply an object that is going to sort of be a goal ultimately, because what we're going to do is come up here and make sure you're in your end dynamics menu set right here, and come to your end particles. We're going to create end particles, and in this case I just have balls checked. So if you check that first and then come back to your end particles, we'll create them, and we'll just create an emitter. And go ahead and we'll start from default on everything. So we'll just go ahead and I'm going to leave it just like that. You may want to hit your edit, reset settings, and then hit create. All right, so there's our emitter. I'm going to set this at, say, 500, just so we have some time to play out everything that's happening. Let's take a look at what happens right away. Well, I'm going to go into shaded mode, and there's my particles, and my locator's over here. So I'm going to run the particles for a second here, and we have like 500 frames. So first thing you probably should think about is, do you really need that many particles? I mean, if you let these things go for a while, 500 frames, that's adding a lot of stress to your memory and to the processing power and whatnot. And we may not need, to have those particles all the way, living forever, basically. So that's the first thing to kind of look at. And as you look in here, I've got the particles selected, and here they are in our tabs, particle shape, and the lifespan is set to live forever. I might want to just switch that up to constant and maybe take this lifespan to a constant of, say, 3, just to start out. And then go back to the beginning. Let's play that. And there they go. Okay, so now we have particles there. That's probably good enough for this simulation, so I'll just leave it like that for a moment. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop that. And let's go back up here and take a look at our locator. First thing we want to do is we want these particles to be attracted to a certain point, or to this locator right here. So what I might want to do is let the particles play a little bit, go ahead and select them, and then we'll select this locator right here. I'm going to select that guy right there and come up into your end particles, and we're now going to turn this into a goal. That's going to be the goal for these particles to get to this locator. So I'm going to go ahead and check that. Right now it's a goal weight of 5. I'll do a reset setting, and typically that's going to be your default setting. And right now we'll just leave it like that and hit create. And I'm going to go back to the beginning and play. All right, so already you can see where, those particles are sort of, they're doing what they should. They're being emitted and they're attracting themselves to that goal now, which is cool. So let's take a moment and maybe go into the channel box and take a look at what we have here. We have our locator, and there's our locator, and here's its position. So let's look at the particle shape for a second. And since our locator and our goal are sort of part of the particle system now, you can check in here and see that they show up as your goal. And right now, we set that up with a goal weight of 0.5. And goal for that locator is turned on. And our smoothness is at 3. Okay? So those are kind of something to be aware of. If we switch this goal weight up to, say, just a pure positive 1 and go ahead and replay that, you'll notice that your particles, they're being emitted so fast that you don't see them swarming from the origin. So that's the first thing to be aware of, is you can change this goal weight quite a bit. I'm going to set this goal weight down to, say, 0.250. All right, and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to hit play. So now that looks like it has, kind of more of the properties that we're after as far as a swarm goes, which is cool. So I'm going to maybe even set this down to, say, 0.125. I'm going to see what happens with that. I'll go ahead and hit play. So now you can see with that goal weight, they're falling well below, where they kind of should be attracted to on this goal. So that might not be what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this back to, say, 0.250. All right. And we'll go take a quick look. And they overshoot the goal a little bit. And there they are. So that's cool for now. Let's do this. Let's go back to the beginning. And I think I'll create a quick polygon primitive. This is just going to be our object that we'll use to sort of animate, and attach to. But first thing I want to do is sort of just get this object over here, kind of align it with my locator. We'll kind of set this up the way I set the other one up. And we'll go over here, sort of see where that is, maybe choose our locator and pull this guy up a little bit, put that into there. And maybe in a little more. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and select that. I'm going to select this sphere, and now we want to go ahead and parent those. So now they're both together kind of as a system. And now it's okay. I can sort of animate this going wherever I want it to. So I'll just add in a quick translation. So I'll select those three, right mouse key and key selected. I'm going to bring it forward a little bit, and we'll move it over here somewhere to like over here and maybe up there. All right. So we'll just set it a few frames more ahead, come down, just sort of randomly animate this thing to go to some different positions on the grid here. We'll do that, bring this up. I think I'll bring this up, maybe move it down below the grid. I'm going to animate that from there. And we'll bring it up here a little bit more. Go over here. Maybe bring it up to there. I don't know. You just sort of randomly animate it. We'll take it right there, and I'll kind of take it back to where it started right there. I'll set another key. So now I'm going to go ahead and sort of set that like that. And you can see because we set this up with the particles being attracted to that locator or the goal now, we now have it swarming around the, object that we want it to swarm around. So really simple. I mean, that's like super simple. All right. Now, let's look at the conserve value next. We've got all this. I'm going to go ahead and hit pause for a second and select my particles right here and maybe come back over into the attribute editor. And I'm going to take a look at a couple of things. You can set your radius from right here. We could make those particles a little bigger if we want. We can make them a little smaller, and that's cool. If we want, we can change the radius scale from top to bottom by just adding a little point in here and then bringing them down a little bit. Now we kind of have some variance in the scale there. You could also put another point in here and maybe scale some in the middle up and some of these down a little bit. So now we have some in the middle that are bigger than the others. It just gives them some randomness, no big deal. And you'll notice that by default, collide and self-collide are on, and that means the particles are colliding and self-colliding with themselves. So that's great. Okay, I'm going to go back to the beginning real quick, and I'm going to select my object right here, this sphere. And let's see, actually, I think I'm going to let it play a second, and I'm going to grab my particles, and then I'm going to choose my sphere. I'm going to come up here into end particles, my end mesh, and just create a passive collider. That just means that this sphere is going to be a passive collider now for these guys. So I'll go ahead and do a little play on that and see what happens. Okay, so it looks like the particles are sort of colliding with that, which is cool. All right, now we'll add the next step. We'll just add we'll add something more complicated in here. We know that our particles are being emitted from the front there. So let's just create a polygon, like say a pipe. All right, I'll just do the pipe like I did before. Give it a little bit of that. And then let's maybe angle it a little bit and bring it down. And we'll just make sort of a pipe for those particles to react against. And it doesn't look like it's in the center right now, so let's just center it out a little bit. And there we go. And we may want to make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to bring that down. And I think I'll scale it up. Okay. So I'm going to let these particles play here. Let's get the particles, and I'll grab the particles first. We'll just sort of grab those guys right there. There they go. And I'm going to shift click and select my pipe, and I'm going to come to my end mesh and create passive collider. So now that's a collider. Sometimes I like to turn my wireframe on, and there they go. So now you can see where they're colliding. I'm going to zoom out here. Sort of colliding with themselves, and they're sort of swarming and doing that swarm thing. So there you go. Very cool. Pretty easy too. Anyway, that's one way to get this all going. Now let's look at an interesting property called the conserve value. I'm going to go ahead and pause this for a second and select my particles, and I'm going to come over here and take a look at some of the various settings right here. What we're interested in is basically this value right here underneath your dynamic properties, this conserve value. Right now, by default, it's set at 1. So let's play around with that. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the animation. I'll do that, and I'm going to lower this conserve value a little bit. We're going to see what happens. Okay, so just right away you can see where messing with that conserve value kind of makes your particles sort of, a little less sporadic, and they're a little more focused to the point of where they're going to. So take a look at that. All right, so that conserve value has a lot to do with flow, and I'm going to go ahead and turn that back up to 1. And so it does have flow, but that's what the conserve value does. You kind of want to be aware that that can make a big difference in anything you do with this type of particle stuff. All right, so now that we have that, let's take a look at another interesting one, the force field generation. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this force field. Right now, if I were to apply some sort of force field generation, it would be to my actual particle shape. But in this case, I'd rather assign it to the sphere. So what I'm going to do is go back to the beginning here, and I'm going to choose this sphere. And now that I have my shape, my sphere shape is the n-rigid 1. I'm going to come down and look at the same thing, force field generation. Right now it's off. I could go ahead and turn that maybe to along the normals, which would just be, sticking straight out from whatever surface point they're at. And let's go ahead and take a look at what happens when we mess with this force field. Right now it's at a magnitude of 1, and our distance is at 1. So we'll go ahead and put this up way up here. Set that force field up. Let's take a look at what happens when we increase the distance. All right, so you can see where increasing the distance is going to kind of set a force field up along this that is going to attract the object, but it's also going to repel them at the same time. And if I move that force field distance down a little bit, let's see if we can get, looks like it's building a little slow. See, it's repelling it at a pretty good rate. So if I bring this all the way down, I can kind of adjust that to actually have a little bit more, see how that's interacting a little more with the particles there. And I could bring that down a little more. So it's just a matter of playing around with it to see what works best for you for whatever type of particle situation you're doing. You can see them flying off of there. All right, I'm going to bring this down to 0, or the magnitude to 0. And I think I'll just bring this force field all the way down. And you can always turn this thing off too. So I'll go ahead and turn it off for now. All right, so those are just some of the basics that you can play around with setting up this type of particle swarm. So anyway, feel free to look at your nucleus settings. You can always hit escape there. Look at your nucleus settings. You do have gravity and everything that's going to be affecting the main particle system. So if I bring my gravity up quite a bit, let's see what happens. You bring the gravity up, those particles kind of get crazy and wild and do something completely different. So let's bring it down, way down. Let's bring it down to like maybe 0.7 or something like that. So an interesting effect right now. Sort of a nice circular kind of effect. Yeah, so don't forget too that you also have emitter properties. I'm going to go ahead and select my emitter. And in this emitter properties, you've got your rate, which we could sort of set up a few less by just lowering this amount. So now we don't have quite as many particles coming out. All right, that works. Or we could go ahead and click on scale rate by speed. And when we do that, it makes these basic emission speed attributes active. So I could increase my emission speed like that. Now I can bring that up, make many more particles come out. Or I could bring that speed all the way down to something really low. And now they sort of come out and, they're emitted slower. You can set a little bit of randomness to that as well. And that's cool. All right. So anyway, play around with that concept of just, attaching a simple emitter to a locator and an object and have fun and sort of play around with all of those different attributes. There's a lot to play around with. Now, also on this, I'm going to go back here and we'll go back to our nucleus. Get in there, and here's our ground plane. Don't forget that you can always turn that ground plane on now. And we'll go ahead and let's get a little bit different angle on it right here. Now you can see those bouncing along the ground plane there. And there they go. All right. So there's your particle exercise for the day. Play around with a goal and a locator and make a swarm. All right. Not much to it, but it's very useful stuff to sort of play around with. And then you can kind of get on to the next step and look at some particle instancing with sort of, replacing this with an actual bee or a fly or something like that. And, remember the sound effect in this adds a lot. These don't necessarily have to be, fully animated, textured little creatures. They could just sort of resemble the shape of an insect or something. And if it were going on in a distance, you're not really going to notice, that it's not really a swarm. The effect is there. All right. So good. I hope you learned something. And I'm sorry again for not posting a tutorial in the last 3 weeks or so. But hey, I've been busy, man. All right. So take care. As always, read the manual. Read a book. Get smart. And as always, be a good person too. But I know you are because you're watching this tutorial. So have a great one, and we will see you for the next one. Thanks for watching.